May 15, 1940. Northern France. The panzer commander feels the judder before he hears the crack. His Mark III lurches violently to the left, the entire hull pivoting on its axis as if gripped by an invisible hand. The engine screams, the right track flails uselessly, rubber road wheels spinning against nothing but air. Through the vision block, he sees his squadron continuing forward, oblivious. Within 30 seconds, his 30-ton machine has transformed from a symbol of Blitzkrieg invincibility into a stationary pillbox. He is immobilized, not destroyed. The distinction will haunt him for the next 6 hours, until recovery vehicles arrive. What stopped him wasn't a shell. It wasn't a mine designed to obliterate. It was a weapon that weighed less than a bag of sugar, cost roughly the same as a pair of boots, and had been scattered across the road by a single British soldier 15 minutes before the German column arrived. The Panzer's armor remains pristine. Its gun still functions. Its crew is uninjured. Yet it might as well be a sculpture. This is the peculiar genius of the Hawkins grenade, a weapon designed not to destroy German armor, but to do something arguably more valuable, make it completely irrelevant. The mathematics of tank warfare in 1940 presented the British Army with an impossible equation. A panzer division could advance 30 miles in a day. British forces, retreating toward Dunkirk, needed to slow that advance without the luxury of prepared defensive positions, minefields that took hours to lay, or anti-tank guns that required crews and ammunition they simply didn't have. What they needed was a weapon that could be deployed in seconds, carried by infantrymen, and turn a road into an impassable barrier without requiring any particular skill or bravery. They needed, in essence, to weaponize inconvenience. By the spring of 1940, the British military establishment had spent 2 decades preparing to fight the previous war. Anti-tank doctrine remained anchored to the concept of the prepared defensive position, carefully sighted guns, interlocking fields of fire, pre-registered artillery coordinates. The notion that armored warfare might be fluid, that tanks might appear anywhere rather than following predictable axes of advance, had been intellectually acknowledged but not operationally integrated. The result was an army equipped with weapons that required what the German advance would never permit: time. Conventional anti-tank mines embodied this problem. The British Mark V mine weighed 14 pounds and required careful burial to function reliably. Laying a single anti-tank minefield meant transporting hundreds of these devices, digging individual holes in precise patterns, covering them to prevent detection, and marking their locations to prevent friendly casualties. A trained engineer section might lay 40 mines in an hour under ideal conditions. The German advance allowed no such luxury. By the time British engineers identified a road worth mining, German reconnaissance vehicles were often already approaching. Anti-tank rifles presented a different but equally frustrating limitation. The Boy's rifle, Britain's standard anti-tank weapon in 1940, fired a .55-inch round capable of penetrating roughly 20 millimeters of armor at 300 yards. Early Panzer models presented vulnerable targets, but only if engaged from the flank at close range by a soldier willing to remain stationary long enough to aim. The weapon weighed 36 pounds, kicked ferociously enough to bruise shoulders through padding, and became progressively less effective as German armor thickened. More fundamentally, it required the infantryman to directly engage an armored vehicle, a proposition that, whilst occasionally successful, violated every survival instinct. The strategic situation compounded these technical limitations. Between 10 May and 4 June 1940, the British Expeditionary Force conducted a fighting retreat across France and Belgium against an enemy advancing faster than pre-war planning had thought possible. Units found themselves defending positions for hours rather than days, falling back through towns they'd expected to hold for weeks. In this environment, weapons that required preparation time became nearly useless. What commanders needed were anti-tank capabilities that could be improvised on the move, deployed during brief pauses and employed by ordinary infantrymen without specialized training. The mathematics were stark. A single panzer division contained roughly 200 armored vehicles. To stop such a division using conventional mines required laying thousands of devices across multiple roads, a task requiring hundreds of engineers working for days. To stop it using anti-tank guns required positioning those guns in the path of an advance whose timing and location might only become apparent hours before arrival. The British Army needed a weapon that could be deployed by the dozen rather than the 100, carried by fleeing infantry rather than dedicated engineers, and still render German tanks combat ineffective. They needed something that didn't yet exist. The weapon that emerged bore the prosaic designation Grenade Hand Anti-Tank No. 75, and the surname of its designer, Captain Cecil Vaughan Hawkins of the Royal Engineers. Development took place at the Ministry of Supply's research facilities in Woolwich Arsenal, where engineers grappled with a seemingly contradictory set of requirements. Create something powerful enough to damage a tank, light enough for infantry to carry dozens at a time, simple enough to manufacture in vast quantities, and safe enough to handle without specialist training. Hawkins' solution was elegant in its simplicity. The grenade consisted of a thin metal case roughly the size and shape of a large bar of soap. Specifically, a rectangular box measuring 6 inches long, 2.5 inches wide, and 1.5 inches deep. This case contained 1 pound of plastic explosive. The entire device weighed exactly 1 pound 13 ounces, light enough that a single soldier could comfortably carry 20 in a backpack. Where conventional anti-tank mines required burial and precise positioning, the Hawkins grenade simply lay on the road surface, waiting. The triggering mechanism embodied brutal simplicity. A pressure plate on the top of the grenade connected directly to a striker pin. Apply sufficient downward force. Roughly 300 pounds, equivalent to a grown man standing with full weight on one foot, and the striker drove into a percussion cap that detonated the main charge. No complicated fuses, no time delays, no electrical components to fail. The weapon functioned through pure mechanical physics. Weight compressed spring, spring released striker, striker hit cap, explosive detonated. Manufacturing reflected wartime pragmatism. The metal cases were stamped sheet steel, produced at facilities across the Midlands using the same presses that ordinarily manufactured biscuit tins and food containers. The plastic explosive, likely Nobel 808 or a similar composition, came from existing demolitions, stockpiles. Percussion caps were standard commercial detonators. Assembly required no specialized equipment. By mid-1940, production reached thousands per week, though exact figures remain classified. Conservative estimates suggest at least 100,000 were manufactured before the war's end, possibly several times that number. The weapon's genius lay in what it didn't do. Unlike conventional anti-tank mines designed to penetrate armor and destroy crew compartments, the Hawkins grenade targeted the only vulnerable part of every tank: the track. 1 pound of explosive detonating beneath a moving track link generated sufficient force to shear pins, crack plates, and tear the track entirely free from its drive sprockets. The tank itself suffered minimal damage. The armor remained intact. The engine continued running. The gun could still traverse and fire, yet the vehicle could not move. In practical terms, it had ceased to be a tank and become an immobile gun emplacement that blocked the road for everything behind it. Deployment required almost no training. Soldiers scattered the grenades across roads at roughly 10-foot intervals. The devices could be laid in daylight or darkness, required no tools, and took seconds each to position. Their dark paint and low profile made them difficult to spot from a vehicle's vision blocks. Unlike buried mines, they could be recovered if the tactical situation changed. A single section of infantry could mine a quarter-mile of road in under 10 minutes. The same stretch would take a conventional engineer team several hours with standard mines. The first widespread deployment occurred during the confused fighting withdrawal toward Dunkirk. Records from this period remain fragmentary, understandably so given the circumstances, but war diaries from several units mention scattering Hawkins bombs across roads outside Arras, Calais, and other delaying positions. The 1st Battalion, Durham Light Infantry, noted deploying approximately 60 AT grenades across a road junction south of Lille on 27 May 1940, reporting 2 German tanks immobilized within an hour, though they could not confirm whether from grenade detonation or other causes. More detailed accounts emerge from the North African campaign. The 7th Armored Division employed Hawkins grenades extensively during the fluid desert warfare of 1941 to 1942, particularly during withdrawals when speed mattered more than elaborate defensive preparation. After-action reports describe scattering the devices across tracks leading to water sources, forcing German reconnaissance units to dismount and clear routes on foot, a process that consumed hours and negated the speed advantage armor provided. One account from the November 1941 fighting around Sidi Rezegh describes a British patrol laying approximately 40 grenades across a desert track at dawn, then observing from concealment as a German column approached at mid-morning. The lead vehicle detonated 1 grenade, immobilizing instantly. The column halted for 3 hours, whilst engineers swept the track. The psychological impact exceeded the weapon's material effects. German tank crews developed acute awareness that any road, any track, any seemingly clear path might conceal devices that could strand them in hostile territory. This awareness slowed advances, encouraged dismounted reconnaissance, and generally eroded the speed and boldness that made armored warfare effective. Immobilization, unlike destruction, carried particular dread. A destroyed tank at least concluded the crew's ordeal. An immobilized tank left them trapped inside a metal box, awaiting either recovery or enemy infantry who would certainly arrive before friendly forces. If you're finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Resistance movements across occupied Europe received Hawkins grenades through clandestine supply drops. The weapon's simplicity made it ideal for partisan operations. Norwegian resistance fighters deployed them on roads leading to German military installations. French partisans scattered them on routes used by occupation forces. In each case, the mathematics favored the defender. One man with a bag of grenades could immobilize vehicles carrying dozens of soldiers. The Germans possessed no direct equivalent to the Hawkins grenade, largely because their strategic situation never required one. As the attacking force throughout most of the war's critical period, Wehrmacht engineers focused on clearing obstacles rather than creating portable ones. The closest German equivalent, the Teller mine, embodied precisely the characteristics the Hawkins design rejected: heavy at 20 pounds, requiring burial for reliable function, and optimized for destroying rather than immobilizing vehicles. American forces developed their own track-breaking weapon, the M1 anti-tank mine, but not until 1943. The M1 shared the Hawkins grenade's basic principle: break the track rather than penetrate armor, but weighed considerably more at 6 pounds and still required burial or concealment. American military observers studying British tactics in North Africa specifically noted the Hawkins grenade's utility for rapid deployment, though U.S. doctrine continued to favor heavier, more destructive mines for prepared defensive positions. The Soviet approach differed entirely. Soviet anti-tank mines emphasized maximum destructive effect, often incorporating multiple kilograms of explosive designed to obliterate the target completely. This reflected Soviet tactical doctrine, which accepted higher manufacturing costs in exchange for guaranteed kills. The TM-41, for instance, weighed 12 pounds and contained roughly 12 pounds of explosive, sufficient to destroy most tanks outright rather than merely immobilizing them. British military analysts conducted comparative tests in late 1942, placing captured Teller mines American M1 mines, and Hawkins grenades beneath identical stretches of track from a captured Panzer III. The Teller mine, when detonated, destroyed the track, damaged the road wheel, and cracked the hull side plate. The M1 shattered the track completely. The Hawkins grenade broke 3 track links and derailed the track from its drive sprocket. All 3 weapons achieved immobilization, but the Hawkins required 1/10 the weight and 1/20 the manufacturing cost of the Teller mine. For an army conducting fighting withdrawals with limited industrial capacity, the mathematics clearly favored the British approach. Assessing the Hawkins grenade's actual impact requires acknowledging the limitations of wartime record-keeping. Units rarely documented precise numbers of enemy vehicles immobilized by specific weapons, particularly during chaotic withdrawals. Attributing immobilization to Hawkins grenades rather than mechanical failure, conventional mines or other causes often proved impossible. What remains certain is that British forces laid tens of thousands of these devices across 3 continents between 1940 and 1945, and German war diaries consistently reference the threat of track-breaking mines on British-held routes. The weapon's psychological effect likely exceeded its material impact. German armored doctrine throughout the war emphasized speed and momentum. Weapons that forced caution, that required pausing to clear roads or dismounting to check for obstacles, fundamentally undermined this doctrine even when the actual rate of immobilization remained modest. The mere possibility that a road might be mined with devices almost impossible to spot from a vehicle's interior forced changes in German tactical behavior. Post-war mine development absorbed the Hawkins grenade's central insight that immobilizing a tank achieved most strategic objectives whilst requiring far less explosive, weight, and manufacturing complexity than destruction. Modern off-route anti-tank mines employ this principle, targeting tracks and running gear rather than attempting to penetrate increasingly sophisticated armor. The basic mathematics that made the Hawkins effective, that mobility matters more than survivability, remains valid in contemporary warfare. Several dozen Hawkins grenades survive in museum collections. The Imperial War Museum in London displays examples in both their original packaging and cutaway to show internal construction. The Tank Museum at Bovington holds grenades alongside the track sections they were designed to destroy, offering visceral demonstration of how 1 pound of explosive could stop 30 tons of armored steel. Return again to that Panzer commander on a French road in May 1940. His tank hasn't been destroyed. No shell penetrated the armor. No gun scored a killing hit. Instead, a device weighing less than 2 pounds, scattered across tarmac by a retreating soldier he never saw, has transformed his vehicle from an instrument of Blitzkrieg into an obstacle blocking his own formation's advance. Behind him, the column halts. Engineers are summoned. Recovery vehicles deploy. Hours pass. The momentum that defined German armored doctrine evaporates into frustration and delay. This was the Hawkins grenade's peculiar genius. It didn't need to destroy. It didn't need to kill. It simply needed to stop. In the calculus of tank warfare, where speed and mobility determined outcomes as surely as armor and firepower, stopping an enemy advance achieved the same strategic result as destroying it, but required a fraction of the resources. One soldier with a bag of grenades could accomplish what would otherwise require artillery, prepared positions, and dozens of men. The weapon embodied British improvisation at its finest. Confronted with an enemy advancing faster than preparation allowed, engineers created something that required almost no preparation at all. Faced with limited industrial capacity, they designed a weapon that cost pennies to manufacture. Given infantry without anti-tank training, they developed a device that required no training to deploy. The Hawkins grenade succeeded not through technological sophistication, but through ruthless simplicity. Thousands of German tanks crossed roads scattered with these unassuming metal boxes. Some detonated them. Some rolled past without incident. But every commander who knew they existed faced the knowledge that the clear road ahead might suddenly become impassable. In a form of warfare built on momentum and surprise, that knowledge alone represented a kind of defeat. The tank remained undamaged. The crew remained alive. The war continued. But the advance stopped dead. And sometimes, in the desperate mathematics of fighting withdrawals and delaying actions, stopping the enemy was victory enough.